Special broadcast here. I just wanted to begin a series of teachings, God willing, Bezrat Hashem, on the Hebrew months and kind of what they mean, what is significant about them, what's the mazel that we should be flowing in while we're in the given months that should direct our prayers, that should direct our Torah study, that should direct the insights that Hashem wants to see us move in during these months. So we should be aware of these times and these seasons. So Baruch Hashem, we've recently entered into the month of Tevet. And in fact, the last couple of days of Hanukkah begin the month of Tevet. So Zot Hanukkah, for instance, was on the 2nd of Tevet. And we're later this week we'll have some fast days or what have you. So what's interesting about that is because the month of Tevet is the 10th month on the Hebrew calendar. It is associated with really a month of darkness. It's a winter month. There's some, as it says in the book of our heritage, there's some anguish in this month. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But we should know that it's a time of darkness. It can be, as I mentioned, just a time of anger. It's associated with the Capricorn or the Gedi or the goat, which is also associated with Esau. And so there's lots of potential negativity in this month for anguish and oppression. And that's why the fact that Zot Hanukkah is a part of the month, it's the only, Hanukkah is the only festival within Tevet. There's no other Yom Tovim, there's no other special holidays. And so that's why Zot Hanukkah is so important, because we take the light of those 8 lights of the menorah, we take that into this very dark month. And it's that spiritual light that we need to use to actually sustain us, number one. And number two, actually to inspire us to grow during this time. So spirituality and finding spirituality in this month is going to be a very, very important aspect as we walk through Tevet and as we bring down the Kedusha that Hashem wants us to bring down. So again, it's Tevet, associated with the Capricorn. It's associated with the tribe of Dan, which the tribe of Dan speaks of judgment. And the goats typically, unlike as opposed to sheep, goats tend to be animals that are rather stern. They're kind of obstinate. So what we have to do with respect to the goat and Dan with judgment is we have to be very steadfast in our favorable judgment. Whenever we get into these times and months where it is a time of darkness, then we have to make an effort, a really strong effort, to bring in a tikkun to that. So if this is a time of judgment where people are potentially experiencing anger and judgment, then what we need to do is we need to draw down the kedusha of spirituality and stand very strong with respect to judging people favorably. It is associated with the letter ayin, which I intend to expound on quite a bit with God's help. The letter ayin and the meanings of the letter ayin, because I think it's going to be very important to understand this month and how Hashem wants us to walk in it. As far as the darkness of it, there are 3 tragic events associated with the month of Tevet. And these are the 3. Number 1, the Torah was translated into Greek. Now, that in of itself doesn't sound too terribly bad, because after all, the Torah has been translated into many languages, thank God. And for that, because not everybody reads Hebrew fluently, and we need to be able to understand the text in our own language. There's nothing wrong with that. However, when the Torah was translated into Greek, that wasn't the purpose. The purpose of translating the Torah into Greek, when it was done at the time, the purpose was to try to Hellenize the text. The purpose was for the Greek world to try to usurp the Torah, to take it away from its Hebraic understanding and bring it into a more secular Hellenistic understanding and make it fit a humanistic society. That was the purpose when it was translated into Greek originally. The second tragedy is that both Ezra and Nehemiah passed away on this day. And that was tragic because these are the people, these are the men who brought us back from the Babylonian captivity, who started building the second temple, who built the walls of Jerusalem, who led the people into a revival of Torah. And without those leaders, we kind of began to fall away and lose our way. On the 10th of Tevet, which is the corporate fast of Tevet, the 8th of Tevet and the 9th of Tevet, some fast on those days privately, individually, but the 10th of Tevet is a national fast. It's a fast of Klal Israel, because it was on the 10th of Tevet that Nebuchadnezzar began to lay siege to Jerusalem during the first temple era, that would eventually lead to the destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av, on Tisha B'Av. Okay, so this would begin on the 10th of Tevet, which is why we fast on the 10th of Tevet. Interestingly, if we look at Esther chapter 2 and verse 16, we find that this was the month that Esther was taken to the palace. This was the month, it says in the month of Tevet, the 10th of the month, she was taken to the palace to become the wife of Ahasuerus. Now, that on the one hand is a seemingly negative, but on the other hand, what we know about Esther is what she was brought to the palace so that she could begin to undo the lies of the wicked Haman. So even though in this time of seeming darkness, where it seems like we're kind of walking with, proverbially speaking, lead or clay boots or what have you, or whatever you want to, walking in muddy clay or whatever. In reality, Hashem is using this time to bring about a great spiritual victory. So Esther, as we know from the book, she was brought to the palace. Mordecai said, for such a time as this. What time of this was he referring to? And the time of this that he was referring to was to save the Jews, right, from the wicked schemes of Haman, to bring about a national salvation. That began in Tevet. So we can see that in this dark month, this month of anguish, this month of anger, which means, by the way, since it is a month of anger, we've got to make sure and channel our anger to a godly anger, which, as one commentator said, this means that we have to really work on our humility so that we can draw down the wisdom of God, so that when anger erupts, that it's not carnal anger. It's not an anger in which we sin, but it's an anger that we can direct for holy purposes, an anger that brings life. And we can only do that if we self-nullify, if we bitul, if we completely nullify self, and we get our own ego out of it, and we actually become humble people, which, by the way, the biggest thing we need to work on during this month is we need to ask Hashem, through the merit of Messiah Yeshua, to really increase our love, our kindness, and our mercy towards other people. This has to be something that is our critical focus during the month of Tevet. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's the month of Esau. How do we overcome Esau? Esau is equivalent with anger. He's also known as Edom. When people get angry, they tend to get red. So Esau is known as anger. Esau is also known as what I'm going to refer to as fake kosher. Esau put on airs that he was religious and observant, but in reality, he wasn't at all. He was a total fake, a total phony. And as a result, he deceived a lot of people with this fake religion, this false religion. He had a spirit of religion, you might say. Esau was also concerned with materiality. He was also concerned with stuff. Esau wanted the stuff. He didn't care about the covenant. He didn't care about the mission. He could care less about God or the God of Abraham. He just wanted the assets. He wanted the stuff. So the question is, how do we overcome the spirit of Esau, the mazel of Esau? How do we overcome that while we walk through the month of Tevet? The answer is we have to increase our spirituality. We have to increase our divine connection. We have to connect with the Mashiach. We have to connect with Hashem. We have to really make a stronger, more concerted effort to increase the light of God's Torah. So with that, let's explore ayin in the time we have remaining here. And because this particular letter, as it's associated with this month, is extremely insightful. First of all, the letter ayin, the word itself, ayin, means sight or eye. And this is what it brings down in some resources here with respect to this letter. The word ayin, as we see in Genesis 16:7, is related to the word mayan, which means a spring of water. So isn't it interesting that the eye is associated with the word mayan? Ayin is actually in the word mayan. You just add a mem to it. And when you add a mem to it, which mem is for mayim, you get a spring of water. So the Midrash points out that the human body is made up of 248 organs. And the movements of the human body are all directed by the eye gate. So we have to protect our eye. And in this month of darkness, where there's not a lot of light, there's more Esau in this month. This is one of the 3 months of the Jewish year that are considered kind of dark, difficult months. Well, many of you know, in order for the eye to see, you need light. The better the lighting, the more clear the eyesight. So what does this mean? It means that in this time about the spiritual darkness, we must increase our spiritual light. Now, ultimately, the Mashiach is the spiritual light. So we have to make sure that we increase our connection to the Messiah, and we do that vis-a-vis study of Torah, prayer, and asking Hashem to help us to improve our love, our kindness, and our mercy. Also, symbolically, the organ of the eye and the sense of vision, really, according to the Talmud in Nedarim 64b, represents man's entire being. In fact, Yeshua said, if the eye is dark, then the whole body is dark. Okay? If the eye is dark, then the whole body is dark. So the eye is so important. It directs everything. There's an insight here from Derech Heretz Zuta 9, where it says the eye is like the world. The white of the eye represents the ocean. The iris of the eye represents the land. The pupil represents Jerusalem. And in the center of the pupil represents the innermost chamber of the temple. This is why when you look into somebody's eye, you can kind of see into them, and likewise, you can kind of see into yourself, and they can see into you, because there's such a spiritual connection, which is why it's so important for us to guard our eyes. In Barakot 57b, the Sabbath is called Mayin, or Mayin, Slika, Olam Haba, a semblance of the world to come. And that word Mayin has in it, of course, the word ayin. Just like Mayan. It's vocalized differently. So when we enter the Sabbath, we have a semblance, we have a sight of what the world to come looks like, which means that just like on the Shabbat, we study Torah in order to increase our awareness of God, in order to satiate and saturate our soul, then we need to be doing the same thing with our spiritual eyes. The ayin represents also primordial light, the primordial light of Torah. The Midrash in Osios, the Midrash of Rabbi Akiva, says that, pointing out the Proverbs 6:23, that the Torah is the enlightenment of all the eyes, and it is the light of all the lamps. In fact, as it says, for your commandment is a lamp, it is a Torah, and it is a light. Radak says, while prolonged staring at the sun injures the eye, the more one studies the Torah, the more it lights up the eyes, as it says, mitzvat Adonai bara, Miyarat enam. The command of Adonai is clear, enlightening the eyes, from Psalm 19:10. So the primordial light of creation, which is the Torah, which is Mashiach, was actually concealed and held in reserve for those who would be worthy of that light. And it says in John chapter 1 and verse 4 and 5 that Mashiach was the light of the world, and that light was the life of men, and that when he came into the world, that those who accepted him could perceive that light. So we need to be looking into the Mashiach and really staring at him, basically keep our eyes on the Son. In this case, not the sun in the sky, but the Son, the Son of God, the King of Israel, the Mashiach. So it says, where did God, there's a midrash here that says, where did God hide the light of Torah? Or excuse me, the primordial light, Slika. And the answer is he hid it in the Torah. So the Torah is the light of life. It is the sheath. Therefore, when we diligently pursue it, then we can understand God's true wisdom. So in this month of Tevet, in order for us to overcome darkness, we're going to have to increase our spirituality, which means we're going to have to redouble our efforts to dive into Hashem's word, to dive into connection with him, to dive into prayer. And with that, we're going to increase our love and increase our kindness and increase our mercy. And we've got to actually go out of our way to do that. Sefes Emes explains that man's purpose on earth is to transform the physical covering in which his soul has been encased into the light of Torah and knowledge and the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Ayin equals 70. And there's a big long list of everything that 70 represents. There was the 70 elders. There was the 70 stones that the Torah was written upon. There's a 70 facets of Torah. There's a 70 names of God. There are the 70 souls that went down the Mitzrayim. The number 70 is critical in human history. Basically, what it amounts to is this, is that 70 represents our need to increase our spirituality. To go back to that is that we need to increase our spirituality. Now, there's something interesting here as well about the shape of the ayin. The shape of the ayin is basically made up of two letters, and that is the yod and the zayin. The yod and the zayin make up the ayin. So in looking at that, there's an insight here that says that the gematria of the yud and the zayin is 17, which happens to be the gematria of the word tov, which means good in Hebrew. So the understanding of that is that we have to look at people with the ayin tovah, that is a benevolent eye, that is to judge people favorably. It is critical during this month of Tevet especially. I mean, it's all year long we need to be doing this, but during Tevet especially, when this is the month of judgment, as associated with Dan, we need to go out of our way to look at people and judge them favorably. Assume the best in them. And as we assume the best in them with sincerity, we're increasing our love, we're increasing our kindness, we're increasing our mercy, which is also compassion in Hebrew. And Hashem is likewise doing the same to us. As we are looking at others and saying, you know, I saw them do something, but you know what? They probably didn't realize it. They probably didn't know it. They probably, they made a wrong decision, but you know what? They were just operating on what they knew at the time, and probably they meant the best. Then Hashem says, that's awesome. I'm going to show them favor. And by the way, I'm showing you favor for judging them favorably. That's how one way in which we increase our light is by increasing our love. This is a time also to see the plank in our own eye. Inasmuch as we're judging people favorably, we need to look at our own life and our own situation more soberly. As the Talmud says, many people see very clearly when observing the faults of others, but when it comes to their own faults, their vision is blurred. That insight comes from Baba Basra 16b. So this is a month in which we need to look at the plank in our own eye and do something about it. So we're judging people favorably. We're assuming that everybody is righteous and we need help. We're turning the tables. They're righteous and we need help. Hashem, Look at them. They're awesome. Father, help me. We need to see the plank in our own eye and then ask Hashem to help us to get rid of it, which is all a part of being more spiritual. And finally, this is the month. Ayin represents charity, but it's very interesting. So it says here, according to Shabbat 104a, Shabbos 104a, in the Talmud, they have an Aleph Beit comparison. And so in this case, Samek is compared to Ayin, so that the phrase Semoch Aniyin, that is, support the poor. But in this case, it doesn't mean support the poor necessarily with our money, although giving charity financially is always a great thing to do, okay? Giving charity is considered one of the pillars of making teshuvah and really making a spiritual change. But I want to emphasize that in this case, the charity being discussed here with respect to the ayin is the charity of moral support. That is, taking someone who is depressed, someone who has lost their self-esteem, someone who has lost their edge, somebody who is so low in their spirit, and building them up, helping them to understand that no, they're not lost forever. No, if they made a mistake or whatever, it's not the end of them, that God has a plan and a future for them, and you're there to show them charity, that is to show them love, kindness, and moral support. And as it says in Bava Basra 9b, talking about representing moral support brings far greater reward than just giving financial help. Financial help is awesome, but really helping someone to improve their self-esteem, to improve their self-worth, helping them to understand that God really does love them and wants the best for them, and that they're not stupid or lost or worthless or whatever, but they're really holy and awesome, and they're a tzaddik if they've made teshuvah or in their life. That is the charity being discussed here. So it says here that this is done. The reason it's such a higher level is because on the one hand, we can just give money. That's just our financial support. But doing what I just mentioned involves our whole being. It really involves our soul connecting with their soul in a positive way. And then just like it says, and I'll just close with this, listening to the problems of the depressed human being, speaking to him sympathetically, preventing him from falling. And if he's already fallen and lost his dignity, helping him to restore his impaired self-esteem. This dimension of moral support is the message of the Samek Ayin, and it's particularly the message that we can take hold of during the month of Tevet. So, Shalom Aleichem, thank you for listening. Let us walk in the strength that God has for us during this month of Tevet. God should help us to increase our love, increase our kindness, increase our mercy, increase our spirituality, that he should bring the light of Torah to us, and we should therefore bring down all the Kedusha that he has for us in this month of Tevet. God bless you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Look forward to seeing you on the Aliyah. Shalom Aleichem.